He called out to me as old school in the middle of the entire strategy team. He grinned so hard, as if he had invented oxygen and we had forgotten to thank him for it. Then he dared to explain back to me the compliance framework that I have built and maintained for years, using a flow template he stole from LinkedIn. I didn't even try to correct him. I just stood there. I took a few sips of the break room coffee I've been consuming for 19 years and listened to Gavin's words, fresh out of whichever MBA kennel the CFO's money had purchased, calling my audit flags paranoid bottlenecks. That was the moment I became sure of something. This wasn't about optimizing or anything like that. This was entirely about erasing. People think being quiet is a huge weakness, but they also think that seniority means you no longer have the energy to bother. For that reason, the ones who become executives love old workers, until we remind them who built the skeleton they're still stomping on. Gavin had no idea about the differences between risk logs and access protocols. He thought the principle of segregation of duties was something like a seating arrangement. And yet somehow this walking nepotism hand grenade earned the title of Director of Operational Efficiency. No interviews and no systems background, just a recycled TED Talk speaker voice, and a last name that HR bows to as if it were 1955. Before Gavin arrived, every day of mine was a copy of the last. No flash, just clean logs, humming pipelines, and zero downtime. I trained the new hire they threw at me. I even helped 3 former CFOs, kids, turn into junior analysts who actually knew the job. 2 of them still send me holiday cards. But Gavin, he wanted chaos. He started cutting as soon as he walked in without reading the documentation. He completely deleted the redundancy tags I had put in place after a near miss with the SEC in 2018. I calmly asked him, "Would you like to take a look at the audit logs before changing anything?" He waved it off. "This is called Agile. Nancy, maybe you'll Google it sometime." That's when I was sure we weren't in some kind of restructuring. They wanted to eliminate us. By the way, if you're still listening to me, take 2 seconds right now to like the video and subscribe. It changes more things than you think. %95 of people watch without subscribing, but this story is different. This is the story they'll remember too. Let's go back to Gavin. In just his second week, Peter released an internal memo to Sunset, a tool I had personally built after a court compliance incident. It was a useful tool that cross-checked external vendor changes against our internal payroll entries. The reason? It clutters the dashboard too much. I scheduled a face-to-face meeting, but he didn't show up either time. Then he messaged me on Slack. "Trim the fat and keep up with the program." He didn't even say hello, so what did I do? I flagged the risk and documented all the changes, then sent all of it to internal review. And the next day, the CFO invited me to Zoom. The entire company was there, cameras on, in front of everyone. He was smiling, but you know that you're safe. Smile. Well, this was the opposite. He said I was slowing the momentum of a promising leader. He said I was creating a culture of fear and inflexibility. Then Gavin asked for a public apology. I didn't blink once. I slowly turned on my microphone. "Okay," I said. That was it. The room suddenly went ice cold. But silence has always been my strongest skill, and when I said, "Okay," I wasn't accepting it. I was preparing myself. Gavin started driving systems straight toward the graveyard without even reading the document names. He called it old method bloat. For example, he removed 6 cross-verification nodes I had personally set up after the last SEC compliance warning. 6. One of them alone was the multi-factor control sitting on top of a distribution that caught 2 fraudulent vendor payments in 2019. But according to Gavin, the rules were simple. If it wasn't in his color-coded Excel from the second week, it didn't matter. He designated everything that was older than 6 years old as archaeological debt. I swear, archaeological. Like they had some kind of institutional memory. That was a fossil that had to be swept away in order for them to be able to brag about having a new lean tech transformation. As soon as the next quarter's investor meeting loomed on the horizon, I sent him a courtesy message. I referenced the risk created from what he had removed with words of deletion, creating a gap where duplicate subcontractor labels would then go unfiltered, and rules on invoices would then bypass. I included all the pictures. I included before and after flow on it too. You know, just so a human could go back and say, "Oh yeah, I see a risk here." 4 hours later, only one line had come through. Thanks so much for the heads up. Let's stay solution-focused, coming from such a person. Saying you have to install a browser extension whenever you hear the term sandbox environment. It's funny, like, really funny, but not in a laughing manner. It turns your stomach. So I dealt with it the right way. I escalated it calmly via the secure back channel I had helped establish for the compliance department several years prior. The point wasn't to humiliate Gavin. The point was to protect the company. You would think that a company worth $800 million would be concerned with the protections that keep you away from federal court. But no. What mattered to them was not their security, but their status, and Gavin's family name headlined this list. The CFO didn't hold a meeting after hearing of my escalation. He didn't want to hear any more information. He didn't care about any of the risks I identified, the duplication of entries, or any of the liabilities. You understand what happened to him. You know he scheduled another all-hands on Zoom. Again, cameras on. Gavin's face is radiant like a person who won a spelling competition. "Nancy," began the CFO, leaning forward into the camera like he was giving a eulogy, "we've had some concerns expressed that you are causing tension within the company, that you are being obstructionist, that my son is trying to innovate, and that you are holding onto solutions that are rapidly becoming obsolete." My son. This happened right before our very eyes, and made known to everyone the actual reason in a way that he did not even realize. I said nothing. "As of today, you will be removed from the operations pipeline unless you agree to make a public apology for questioning leadership," he continued. A few people closed their eyes. A person held their breath. Then the majority lowered their head, and you know the cash and hostage situation where everyone acts like they didn't hear what was said. Same thing. Gavin paused. He didn't speak. He just smiled. That slight smile, a smirk of one who never had to earn it, of one who received it like a summer home. I turned on my microphone. "Understood," I said next. I left the meeting. No need for a defense. No need for a speech, because power does not always roar. It can be quite silent, patient, calculating, waited out. So waited out the room can forget where it's coming from. I returned to my desk. The cursor blinked in the resignation statement within the template for signatures, but I didn't type a single word. For now. I simply sat in the glow of my computer monitor and let the familiar sensation wash over me. Someone once again mistook my silence for surrender. My hands were completely steady. Anger, panic, nothing but icy purity. It wasn't a punishment to be on that Zoom call. It was a permission slip. I opened an encrypted hard drive that I had not accessed in years. And there was a collection of data from a me that nobody had remembered. The me from when a then-young Nancy was not referred to as a legacy asset, but a consultant. The title written in the contract was 2006, before the acquisition, before every suit like this place was established yesterday. So, what's the original systems architect? I then discovered this addendum protocol, a clause which I had myself written, and which no one had ever deigned to read. 8C. In the case of forcible removal from the project for reasons that lack merit or due process, the contractor shall retain all exclusive rights to the derivative software modules. In simpler terms, it meant, if they cut me without reason, the skeleton is mine. But you know what's the funniest part? None of them ever cared. Never in 19 years. Several additional concepts also began to fall into place in my brain. I never would have returned. I would have gotten out. However, the roots of where I left off would remain in me. I then began crafting my plan in my brain, my way, quietly and with no loose ends. I logged into my management console, not the fancy new front end that Gavin had set up for appearance's sake, but the actual one. I disabled 3 of the keys related to internal sync licenses. I didn't revoke them. I only made them look like they were expired. Well-designed exits, but not sharp enough to trigger alarms just yet. I had my letter of resignation prepared. I left room at the end of it for something I couldn't write at that point. I opened a different file, my checklist. This was the emergency shutdown catalog. Each asset, each service, each vendor pipeline. All that had a contract in my name or in the name of my LLC. Ridge South Systems, my past consulting firm. Technically, it was never dissolved. I simply allowed it to lay dormant for all those years. Item 1, revoke the monitoring dashboard license handshake. Item 2, stop the backup synchronization for the investor-ready View that Gavin was so proud of every time we had a stand-up. Item 3. Prepare encryption log archive transfer project legal. On paper, this was a cleanup, but anyone with half a brain would immediately understand what it meant. I encrypted the exit timers, tagged them as session rotation maintenance, and did it gradually, one system every 10 hours. Slow enough not to draw attention, but determined enough that it couldn't be stopped before it was too late. Then I reached under my desk. I pulled out the USB drive that had been plugged into a fake port since 2015. Inside was the last working copy of the compliance shadow logs. No cloud and no replica, just mine. This wasn't revenge, it was insurance. Because if they dared to throw me out of the house I built, then I wasn't going to leave the foundation there. The first system to stumble was the investor portal. There was no big explosion, just a small timeout error. The kind you immediately brush off like, "Is the internet slow today?" Gavin probably thought it was a server hiccup, or that the automatic token refresh had been forgotten. Before even glancing at the logs, he likely blamed some nameless contractor in Bangladesh. I can almost hear him. 100% someone messed up the deploy again. But if he had looked, he would have understood this. License ping returned current passive handshake. That handshake used to be automatic, until I turned it off. By the way Gavin had named the dashboard he paraded around Apollo metrics, like he'd sent something to the moon. First it flickered, then it loaded empty tiles, and then it froze. He had hard-coded it to pull data from the live view table. I had hidden that table behind a second firewall. The wall that filtered test entries, invisible vendors, and fake shells. Without my key it saw nothing, and Gavin saw a pure white screen where the investor demo charts were supposed to be. Still, no one suspected anything. That's the best part about quiet exits. Everyone gets so locked into the next meeting that they don't realize what's not working until the lights in the house are completely out. Legal caught the first cent. The vendor renewal got stuck in automatic review. Name, Ridge South Systems LLC. That was my company, my pre-merger consultant identity. Technically never acquired, never absorbed during the purchase. Something had triggered a system. Red flag. I can picture it. A junior paralegal squinting at the metadata. Why is this dormant shell causing a license conflict? They would eventually understand everything, just not before the dominoes finished falling. I submitted my resignation in the meantime, folded it neatly and walked into HR, slid it across the desk. I clipped my badge on top like it was nothing. The receptionist with a bright smile. "Oh, are you switching departments?" she asked. I didn't answer but nodded like I was. "Thank you so much for your time," I murmured and walked out before the doors closed behind me. She didn't open the letter. She wouldn't have understood the last page anyway, a summary of derivative rights and the timestamp of my final entry triggers. Outside, a light rain was starting to fall. Not a storm, not yet, but enough to make you feel the air had changed. I knew the office was agitated, even if for the wrong reasons. Gavin was probably saying, "Oz latency." Legal was digging through expired contracts with phrases like legacy exposure, and the CFO was likely rehearsing his quarterly deck, calling it internal simplification, while the foundation was already cracking. This was the phase no one notices, when everything is slightly out of alignment. Not broken, just disconnected, and when you pull enough threads, even the most beautiful tapestry starts to unravel. Monday morning, Gavin walked in. He had the demeanor of someone who had negotiated world peace. Expensive sunglasses hanging from his shirt collar and a protein shake in his hand. His fake tan glowing under the fluorescence. He flashed the receptionist, who looked like she was actively trying to turn into a ficus, a little finger gun gesture, and glided down the hallway like a dog off its leash. When he reached my desk, he stopped, examined it carefully. No coffee mug, no post-it wall, and no half-worn bracelet sitting next to my keyboard. Just the flat, silent emptiness of someone who had left with intent. "So you finally learned your lesson, huh?" he muttered toward the empty chair, trying to save face in front of a nearby junior analyst. The analyst gave him a confused blink and then went back to pretending his screen wasn't frozen. On the other side of the building, in a room with blackout curtains and 4 standing desks, things were heating up. At 7:43, an alert fired, unauthorized credential detected, license key invalid. Normally this is a routine panic button. Someone typed a password wrong. A vendor changed a handshake, but this time it was tied to the core reporting engine. And the license key wasn't just saying, "not working," it was returning null, no backup or shadow copy. The system wasn't just denying access, it no longer even knew what access was. At 8:12, a senior support engineer sent a note to the team lead. "Very strange, Ridge South Systems shows as vendor owner on the CF pipeline off-state. Isn't that Nancy's?" At 8:17, legal's Slack channel jumped from idle to DEFCON 2. A paralegal sent screenshots of an agreement that hadn't been updated since 2009. One sentence was highlighted in fluorescent marker. "System continuity rights remain the property of Ridge South Systems. The company had never countersigned and never overwritten it, just my initials, date, and an unexpired digital hash." At 8:23, Alice, corporate legal, pinged the CFO on Slack. "Nancy Brown's name still appears as the primary licensor of the core financial system. Are you aware? Immediate verification needed. This affects investor access." The CFO wasn't in a position to respond, because at that exact moment, Gavin was furiously refreshing the dashboard, watching the charts he'd promised investors turn into white boxes and red question marks. Like a fragile currency, one bad morning, one buried contract clause, and in the next moment you're not the company's future. You're just the kid who blows the pipes while trying to paint the house. Gavin probably thought I was bluffing. "She'll come back after a while, apologize, and be a team player," he thought, but the problem with mistaking silence for surrender is this. Sometimes that silence is the sound of a dangerous trap closing. At 9:03, half of the packets headed to the board couldn't pass verification. Every export button returned a friendly 502 error. "Please try again later." But there was no such thing as later. The decks had to go live at noon. Without them, investor alignment shattered like a cheap coffee mug breaking into ceramic pieces. Gavin wasn't laughing anymore. The finance director was pacing anxiously. The junior analyst, bless him, was trying to paste screenshots into the PowerPoint backup, but the charts were gone. The data sets behind them hadn't actually disappeared, they were sealed. The access path they had fully trusted for years was no longer a door they could open. At 9:26, Alice pushed open the CFO's glass door without knocking and rushed in. James didn't look up. He was staring at an empty Slack message box with his fingers hovering over the keyboard like it might type the apology for him. "Did you fire Nancy publicly?" she said, breathless, holding a few stapled pages marked with colored tabs. James blinked. "What?" He said. "Did you fire Nancy publicly?" she asked, catching her breath. "On the all hands, on the recording." James leaned back in his chair as he answered. "I told her apologize or step aside, and she said okay." Alice stared at him like he'd confessed to theft. "Oh my God," she said, and then louder, "You can't do that. Not while that clause is active in her contract." She slammed the pages onto the desk. "Clause 6 billion, she said. Derivative rights and conditional IP licenses, if removed improperly or without cause, the tools, dashboards, audit shells, archive mapping are hers, not the company's." The CFO went pale. "That was a long time ago, it surely..." "It was renewed in 2017, Alice cut in. "The extension was filed and it has Nancy's signature. No counter-signature from management. It defaults back to her terms." "But she was the founding architect," she said quickly, "and now a hostile vendor." At 10:02, a few investors had already requested the final packet. None of them could access the files. The system redirected to a disabled license page that read, "Contact Ridge South Systems." That was me. That banner used to say, "Powered by," I changed it a long time ago. Gavin was probably Googling emergency vendor override, but there wasn't one because there wasn't supposed to be. This was built by someone who swore never to give keys to people who couldn't be bothered to read the map. What they called old was actually leverage, and now it was disappearing right in front of their eyes. At 10:35, an emergency board meeting was placed. No agenda and no deck, just a single topic line from the chairman's office. Compliance risk urgent review. The first slide was just a blank screen and a red line. Q3 audit trail file not found. That's when the whispering started. So Gavin's efficiency had not been skin deep. He had deleted the single occurrence of the Q3 compliance log tree. The Q3 compliance log tree had no versions and no backups. The dashboard was sleek looking on the outside, but when you got down deep, it was empty inside. Not to mention, This audit trail was not elective. It was required in 2 federal contracts. The lack of it would result in an audit trail investigation. There was a question about what the options were for legal replied in one sentence. Nancy Brown was the only caretaker of the encrypted archive. That's when the mood in the room shifted. From panic to calculation, I was no longer a fired employee. As far as they were concerned, I was the only person in the world who knows where the audit skeletons are buried. It buzzed at 11:12, a private email, not the CFO or the legal department. It was the CEO's assistant, Emma. We had worked on 1,000 small tasks together before Slack made it all irrelevant. It was my job to get the post-it between compliance and legal. Topic about today. Nancy, I hope you're all right. I understand that things have escalated. Would you be willing to talk? No agenda, just a chance to talk, Emma. I didn't respond immediately. I was sitting right there at the kitchen table, watching the light slide across the laptop, and I thought, how many people finally realize that backup isn't synonymous with replacement? I was no longer an employee. Even I wasn't a contractor. But I was an undocumented, single point of failure. Because they never thought they'd need me, and now they had to ask. Leverage did not occur through anger or intimidation. It came from being the last person who still knew how everything actually worked. And then suddenly I was valuable. I never went back. Their glass cubes and kombucha water jugs were skipped. I didn't want a victory lap. I wasn't angry. I was finished. There's a difference. Ridge South Systems was added to the active vendor retainer list a week later. There was no public notice, no email. Only one item listed in the procurement process. Ongoing compliance systems consulting, elevated access. The prize alongside it was several times higher than what I earned, but I didn't withdraw the money because I had plans not yet. Gavin was moved to a new position with a name that read Strategic Development. It was a meaningless name with an office phone that wasn't even attached to a line. We are proud to announce a comprehensive legacy system ownership review committed to transparency and sustainability. A memo from HR, complete with a smile of its own. We are proud to announce a comprehensive legacy system ownership review committed to transparency. And the simple translation of the phrase would be they were anxiously scanning what else does Nancy still own. Late Thursday night, my phone rang. It showed unknown number. I did not answer it. It went to voicemail. The message was short, a woman's voice low and controlled. Ms. Brown, I am representing one of the major investment funds linked to your previous employer. Your dashboards have been assessed. If you're receptive, then we would like to explore a consulting relationship. She did not disclose who she was. She didn't need to. People like that don't call unless the room is already agreed. I leaned back and let it wash over me. They didn't want me because they liked me. They needed me because at last they realized I was not only for show. I was essential. I didn't destroy their empire. I did not leak documents. I am not blowing this whistle. I simply reclaimed what was rightfully mine and turned off the lights when I left. Let them flail in the dark for a while. It turns out it's difficult to attempt a repair if one never made an effort to discover who built the bricks in the foundation. The dashboard disappeared in a soft blink. As the final curtain falls, I was sitting at the kitchen table. I had been holding the same chipped cup I'd been using since the merger. The coffee had reached lukewarm temperatures, though I didn't really notice. It had a certain poetic justice to seeing the final piece of my past disappear silently, not by sight or by acclamation, just for closure. I shut the laptop computer, moved it away onto the table, and turned my head to look towards the window. But the world was just the same, but everything had changed. They thought dismissing me would make everything simpler. It turns out simplification was me. Some lessons are received independent of apologies.